often ignore mass atrocities or mass suffering? This is a question society has been asking itself for many decades. My speaker, Elie Wiesel, touched on this question because he himself was a forgotten victim. He was a victim of one of the largest genocides in human history. Throughout this speech, he has a goal for future generations to start showing compassion towards each other, because apathy is one of the worst things that could happen to a victim. Elie Wiesel is a human rights activist and a Nobel Peace Prize winning author. He is a survivor of Auschwitz, and as we all know, Auschwitz was the largest and deadliest camps during the Holocaust. He is mostly known for his critically acclaimed memoir called Night. In Night, he talks about his experiences as a 15-year-old boy living in Nazi Germany. Elie Wiesel gave his speech, The Perils of Indifference, at the White House on April 12, 1999.
Seductive and be tempting. More than that, seductive. It is so much easier to look away from victims. It is so much easier to avoid such rude interruptions to our work, our dreams, our hopes. It is, after all, awkward, troublesome to be involved in another person's pain and despair. Yet for the person who is indifferent, his or her neighbor are of no consequence, and therefore their lives are meaningless. Their hidden or even visible anguish is of no interest. Indifference reduces the other to an abstraction. Over there, behind the black gates of Auschwitz, the most tragic of all prisoners were the Musulmaner, as they were called. Wrapped in their torn blankets, they would sit or lie on the ground, staring vacantly into space, unaware of who or where they were, strangers to their surroundings. They no longer felt pain, hunger, thirst. They feared nothing. They felt nothing. They were dead and did not know it.
The significance of this speech is the same now as it was then. That indifference is dangerous. It's not only dangerous, but it can be despicable, because it allows us to only focus on our own goals and our own desires. Later on in the speech, he mentions how the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of beauty is not ugliness, it's indifference. Although this speech was written 21 years ago, a lot of what he said can still be applied to today. Today, we have a very special tool called technology. We can know what goes on around in the world in a matter of minutes, and it's up to us to decide what we want to do with that information. We can either take action on what happens around the world, or we can live in blissful ignorance, because there's no urgency to help. To be honest, when reading and listening to this speech, this brought me back to history class, when we would learn about all the atrocities that happened throughout history, and we would ask ourselves, how could they let that happen? But now we have to ask ourselves, how could we let that happen? Because there are many issues going on around in the world today around us. Things like Chinese internment camps, the rights of non-citizens in this country, or even the rights of our own citizens. Apathy is a very dangerous thing and an ongoing issue that we need to fix. And that is why I think this speech will endure, because it speaks on that. That is why activism is so important to Elie. To To get his point across, he uses many rhetorical devices, one of which he uses a metaphor when he says, indifference is not only a sin, it is a punishment. Indifference is always the friend of the enemy. He also uses parallelism. He says, for what you are doing for the children in the world, for the homeless, for the victims of injustice, for the victims of destiny and society. He also uses rhetorical questions. He asks, does it mean we have learned from the past? Does it mean society has changed? Does it mean we really have learned from our experiences? He not only uses rhetorical devices, but he also uses ethos, logos, and pathos in the speech. He uses ethos when he greets in the beginning. He says, Mr. President, Mrs. Clinton, members of Congress, excellencies, friends. He greets them as though he knows them, and he creates credibility through that way. He also creates credibility when talking about his childhood and his own personal experiences at the time at the camps during World War II. He uses logos when he brings up facts about history. He mentions how the Pentagon knew and the State Department knew of what was going on, but nothing was done about it. He also told the story of the SS St. Louis, which was a boat that brought 900 Jewish refugees, and it was refused U.S. landing. They were even called the refugees nobody wanted. He not only uses logos, but he also uses pathos. To get his point across, he made the audience feel awkward and as though they had a sense of guilt themselves. But at the end, he made them feel compassion towards the victim. Elie Wiesel has a great ability with words because he's a great speaker. He's a human rights activist, and he encourages us to be as well. Because people all around the world are still fighting for their rights, and we need to be there with them, fighting with them.